It's amazing to have you here. Welcome to the podcast for AI plus Munich, the AI Nation podcast. In fact, you're the future of AI, literally. Tell us who you are, what you're doing. Please.
So I'm one of the co-founders of Suitcase. We are a legal tech company, and what we do is solve legal disputes online, so you don't have to go before the courts. At core, it is a bidding mechanism. So we try to find a common ground between parties and mediate a settlement. So we avoid the escalation and we try to actually de-escalate a legal dispute and help both parties to settle it.
It's already amazing in my opinion, because where you put the problem before things escalate.
Yes.
This was actually when I read the first time about your startup, like, okay, this, you understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when did you define this point of this is where we need to tackle this actual problem? Because it is one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it clearly is one. People fight a lot. That's something that is
avoid the fighting.
Yes. Yeah.
One way or the other. I think that was a perfect opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the initial idea was a friend of us, a Brazilian lawyer, came to Germany, and he actually on his phone was, just as a side hustle, was an arbitrator, so a private judge, you can say, in a digital platform from Brazil where he, as a judge, decided on cases on his phone. And so we were just sitting on the couch and he was like deciding cases. And we thought this is really ludicrous and it's crazy. And we thought, is that something that would be possible in Germany? It took us a long way. We started this out by we were still at university, so it was first an idea. We worked on it during our weekends. And by the time we realized that we don't want to provide just a digital version of a court, but we realized that in most cases, people don't want to know who's right or wrong. They don't want to know the legal details. They just want to solve the dispute. And solving the dispute means that you settle it. And so we decided that this is the entry point.
Really amazing.
It was a little longer than that, obviously, but this is the condensed version for you.
That's the beginning of the set, and we're already in. But one thing you said, we.
Yes.
Please tell us about your co-founders. Because we think diversity is a huge aspect to make a functional startup.
Yes.
And you are a really cool one, a successful one. Please tell us about your co-founders and how you met.
Yes. So I have two co-founders. One is Tim, one is Philip. Tim I met during university. He also studied law, and Philip actually know via his flatmate, because we were looking around for an IT guy, the absolute classics, and with a flatmate is a friend of mine. He said, look, my flatmate might be an option. He's just on a sabbatical between bachelor and masters. He could be a really good asset for your team. And so he said, okay, let's talk. And we realized it fits both in terms of what we need skill-wise and from a personality standpoint. So we are the classic, some might judge that, 3 male founders team, but we are diverse in the sense of the backgrounds we have. I studied law, economics, and psychology. My co-founder Tim studied law. Philip is somewhere between informatics, software development, and mathematics behind informatics. So from that standpoint, we are indeed diverse. Yes. So.
And the AI strengths is from his side, I guess. Or how did he had to work into the field? Is it based on the startup idea?
Yeah, essentially. What he's mainly focused on is as I pointed out, mathematics behind IT, broadly speaking. And so this is something that has a lot to do also with statistical questions, something that is more leaning towards deeper technical questions and not how do I design the millionth landing page for a B2B SaaS software? And so to that extent, it was something that he felt more comfortable moving in, that perhaps somebody would do who has more a UI or UX leaning focus in software development and software engineering. But it was something entirely new to him. So it was something he had to work himself into.
Sounds like it just worked out. How long did you actually look for a co-founder, a tech one? And because when you talk to other startups, usually to find the right co-founder is a long journey.
Yes.
Something really intense. You go to different ecosystem events, you go to pitch nights, whatever, co-founder platforms, online-wise. Now you know how you succeeded, but what went wrong? How long did you search and how?
Yes. In fact, we didn't search long, which might, in hindsight, sounds really bad. There's some truth to that. We can come back to it later.
Yeah,
But
sure.
at the same time, what we focused on is mainly do we share the same values? Because like from a personality standpoint, Philip is very, very different, for instance, from me. He's very introverted. He's very rational. I can sometimes be the exact opposite. And at the same time, we share the same common values. We, in fact, come originally from the same region, Germany, Northwest Germany. He's from Paderborn. I'm from Bielefeld. So it's more or less next to one another. So we have a bit of the same background. And that is what initially drove our decision. And then we just got somebody on board. I know still from my days in school, who also went into software engineering. And I actually just asked him and said, Lawrence, what do you think? Is this a right fit for us? Can you interview him a couple of times? Is this the kind of skill we would need for our team? But it wasn't that level. It was not that we went out to large startup fairs. We really dived into it, which is also to one specific reason. We don't come from the startup bubble as you would see it here at Unternehmertum. My background and from the others is not within that field. We, these kind of geeky, nerdy people within their fields, respective fields, that realize this might be something they want to try out for business. But we are not the other way around, somebody who says, I want to build a company and I'm just trying to find the right subject. We are the exact opposite. And so we didn't even know that these fairs existed. We didn't even know that there is a questionnaire you should ask one another to understand whether it fits. We didn't know all of that. We literally just tried to find each other, see whether we are fit on a personal level, have roughly the skills we need, and then try this out while still being in university. So it took a long stretch between starting this as an idea and starting to work on it full time.
How long exactly? How long did you actually elaborate on the whole idea of, hey, because things get sparked, like hey, this is something we should tackle.
Yeah.
And then what means tackling? Yeah? Sometimes at the beginning you start with writing out on paper, or how did you start?
2.5 years to respond to your first question. Okay. So a really long time. I was literally still in uni. It started out, as you pointed out, I still the other day looked into our digital archive, and I would find old piece of paper that I scanned at that point where we would just try to toss around ideas. From that point on, it became something that we did on weekends. So it was within the pandemic. The way it worked was we would meet up at one of our places for a weekend, spend 48 hours in a room, try to juggle a couple of things. And the time we really started working full-time on it was March 23, when we got accepted to the Expreneurs program here at Unternehmertum. That was the initial spark where we said, now we should do this full-time.
Yeah. Well, actually, it sounds very much like anything you would do in the startup ecosystem, like dive into actually the interviewing of the co-founder, which you did. You didn't look for a lot of people, but you had an idea, and then interviewing them, checking out if you have a line.
Yes.
The long time thing. So you basically did everything you would learn in the ecosystem, but you could reason that this is actually something useful to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Congratulations for doing that. I think it's interesting how often it doesn't happen for reasons we don't know. Maybe just not thinking about it clearly, or just being, I don't know.
To some extent, you are naive, and it's something new to you. That's, for instance, why I give lectures these days at university as law faculties, because within the education of becoming a lawyer, becoming an entrepreneur is not something you get trained for good reason. Don't get me wrong here. But that's why all of these things you should think about, and I would think about now if I would build up a new company. These were things we had to learn the hard way. Things we had to learn over a long period of time, without much counsel, without much knowledge, and without the resources of doing this, actually.
I think it's a really cool thing that you go back to university to teach these assets that you have gained, because actually I'm doing the same thing. I'm an archaeologist working with AI. That's part of my background. I go back to university not for doing a career in research anymore, but to bring in the mindset, the idea of how to develop an actual company, of these ideas of the methodology behind it, which is kind of useful for everyone, I guess. Yeah. Thank you for doing that as well. I think that's really, really cool.
It makes fun.
It's actually fun. Yeah, it's really cool. So you got a team, you got an idea, you went to let's do a startup journey, let's say. What would you think is a bit of the peak thing that happened before things, let's say, unfold in various directions to you? Something really amazing when you thought, like, this is something we're going to do. Like, we're not just trying it out for a weekend or two, or trying things out, but you think, okay, let's go all in.
The moment we went all in, also in terms of how much time we spent on it, was the time we got accepted into Expreneurs, literally. We were at the time still located across Germany. One was in Düsseldorf, one was in Trier, one was in Berlin. So none of us were in Munich.
Yeah.
And we'd just been told by somebody, look, there's this like Unternehmertum. We didn't even hear of that by that point. That was still something novel to us.
Yeah.
And so they said, there's this like huge thing where they support startups and founders. I think this could be really helpful for you. There's a program that might like spark your interest. It's called Exponers. And they said also that there's going to be a new program, the LegalTech Collab, in conjunction with the State Ministry of Justice. And so we thought, okay, this is a really good fit. So we, again, very naively applied for it without knowing that hundreds of startups do. And we didn't do it. Yes, we were really naive and we were like, let's fucking do it. And so we applied for it and we made it to the second round, which meant we came into this exact building somewhere. It must have been around February 2023. And again, didn't really know what to expect. Went to in one of the rooms, I think it was one floor down from here. And yeah, literally just pitched our idea, went out, said, oh, this was fun. And everybody redirected across the Republic because we all literally just came in the morning, did that 1 hour or so meeting, went back out and thought, okay, let's see what comes out of it. And when they accepted us, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before the beginning of the program, it was a bit of a stressful time because within these 2 weeks, I would do the first state bar as a lawyer. So I would still have to get examined an entire day to know whether I'm good at what I'm doing. Yeah. So that happened. And then they said, yeah, you can come to Munich. We're part of the program, which for us was the moment where we realized we really want to dive into it. So we should be present in Munich. And so within these 2 weeks, I finished my education as a lawyer. I found a small apartment at Rosenheimer Platz, which was just a sublet, which was amazing. Really lovely family, wanted to do an extended holiday before the daughter would go to school. And so we're like, perfect. Yeah. And all 3 of us moved to Munich. And we thought initially it's just going to be the 3 months for exponents, really dive into the community. And then everybody goes back to where they come from, or we decide we're all going to go to, I don't know, Berlin or something. Yeah. But then over the course of the 3 months, we realized that we want to stay. And we realized that Munich might be a better option. And yeah, well, eventually we started our first office here. We are still here. So we are now a Munich-based company, which never was on the agenda. But to come back to your initial questions, it was a long way of saying it. The time that exponents accepted us, we moved across the Republic. We decided to do this full time. And so I think that's the point where we said, now we want to really do it.
You were accepted for exponents.
Yes.
You started to engage with the ecosystem that is Unternehmertum. This is a structured center for entrepreneurship, that even more entrepreneurship centers and supporting each other. Yes. Something that you find out when you're here, actually. Yes. Yeah. Did this help you? Did you engage with them? Or was it always your approach to do your thing? Because you came from this direction, like, hey, we have an idea. I think it's amazing. Let's apply there. It's nothing like, hey, let's get support from too many roles. You had a bit of a way to go. Did it change? Or how does this was in your startup?
So by the time that you participated, I think in terms of the idea and the product we wanted to develop, we more or less had an idea. But in terms of how to actually build out a company, we had no fucking clue. That's the blunt and honest answer. And you will often hear founders saying, yeah, we wouldn't stand here without this and that. I think in this case, it's really true. Yeah. I think without somebody giving us a crash course for 3 months on how to actually build the basics of a company, not in terms of how do you incorporate a GmbH or...
Like regulation things are your thing.
Yeah, that kind of thing I'm quite good at. That part I
get the challenge. Yeah.
It's really helpful. Like whenever one of my fellow founders like, Tim, I need a bilingual contract for a software engineer. Do you have like something like that? And yeah, obviously. We do. We have it in our cupboard.
I thought like that.
Digitally, not anymore physically.
Third semester, of course, I got in my homework. Something like that.
Yeah, so yeah, we do have that. And people actually like to come to us and ask us for our support. But jokes aside, that's something we know. That's something you don't have to go to Unternehmertum for. But we didn't have any idea of how you would market a product, sell a product. How you would differentiate the market, and in particular, how you would raise a round, like a first pre-seed round. None of that was something that we ever encountered outside of the walls of this building. I wouldn't literally sleep here. They wouldn't let me, but we would stay a lot of hours here within those 3 months to really understand how you would start a teeny tiny company that is still so small and so fragile, that it's so far away from all those glamorous companies you would know from all the famous startup magazines. And so these basics we would never have without the support of Unternehmertum.
Two things. It's not just Unternehmertum, but it's actual startups. Did you work with them together, like finding out, hey, how did you do it? Other startups doing the same, that went through the same journey, because most of them don't know to understand the aspects what a VC wants, because it's something different than what you want, of course. They had their own agenda, and you need to know that to make decisions that are suitable for both sides.
And so we got to know a lot of founders within the proximity of Unternehmertum, obviously. I do have some friends still from my days in school that also turned out to be entrepreneurs these days. And there's a very, very selective, trusted and small network of founders that I am very regularly in touch with. We have these, what we call therapy sessions once a month, where we just talk to one another and talk very deeply about the challenges we face and realize that not everything is as glamorous as LinkedIn would probably tell you. So we do that a lot. And I think we would not have met these people without the proximity of the network that we find here in Munich, both on this side of the river with the Unternehmertum and with the Werk 1 on the other side of the river where our office is located these days.
Amazing. I think so. It's the one thing they can bring, we really can bring into the startup ecosystem that are for very early stage startups, the contracts that you work on already.
So reach out if you need a contract.
We will tell the others. If you need a contract, there's a startup that can actually help.
So what I'm very good at is helping you to get your deposit back when you move out of your apartment. And what I'm very good at is if you terminate an employee or you get terminated as an employee and you seek severance pay. That's what we negotiate, because these are the two fields of law that we currently operate as a platform. Everything beyond this is pure courtesy. If you're nice to me and you invite me for lunch, then I will also give you employment contracts in exchange.
Amazing. This is how it works.
It does.
Yeah.
It definitely does.
But this is one of the things then when it gets really juicy in regard of where do you get the feedback to develop your platform, the customer, I guess. Yeah, you are lawyers, you know what's going on, but of course other lawyers are your question is, are other lawyers your customers? Are some of the private people? How did you decide whom to actually target with your product?
So yes, I'm educated to be a lawyer, yet at the same time I never practiced as an attorney for years. So in that sense there's already a difference. I am close enough to it that they would accept me as their equal, yet far away enough that I still don't 100% understand what they think, which is good, I believe, in this example, because I'm also not stuck in that perspective. This being said, just on the outset, we started to target out lawyers and legal protection insurance companies because we thought that's just close to home. We know the people already, and the network is something you have to build upon in the first place. And so we said, why don't we just start with those? And to some extent that worked, especially with insurance companies, lawyers. We realized they like it, but they're not going to use it as extensively as insurance companies would do. But then over the time, and that's specific to the two fields of law, tenancy law and employment law that we do, we realized that there might be other groups that actually have a bigger point of, like a bigger pain that we can address. To take the example of employment law, we realized that within a big company, you would have lawyers who would deal with, if the company gets sued, for instance, before the employment tribunals for severance pay. Yet most of the cases, roughly 4 out of 5, get dealt with by the HR team. And they usually have the majority of the work in terms of time, and they usually lack the legal skills to know in detail whether what they do right now is within the parameters of law. And so we realized this within a big company, for instance, we shouldn't target the lawyers, but we should in fact target more the HR teams and help them and relieve them both of the time they invest to negotiate a relief agreement or to negotiate a severance pay instead of going before the lawyers.
how did you identify that you should do that? Was it a bit of a journey towards that, or was it something you could
Yeah.
actually think about and realize, hey, in 2 minutes, like, hey, when you think about it, this should be the way, or did you need expertise?
Mm. So we developed the product together with lawyers who are specialized in the field of labor law, so who actually have a specific title for that. And so we also thought naturally that this is a nice consumer group, because, well, a customer group, because they developed it with us. So I would assume they would also like to use it. But we realized over time that they still like to do things themselves, and they at least argue, sometimes we disagree with that, that their cases are too specific to be just solved via a bidding process that we use. And so what we realized then is we thought about what's the chain of events, you can say. Where does it start when you want to relieve yourself of an employee? And we realized, well, that's within HR. And so what we started out is just do then 10 interviews with HR people and say, look, who within the HR domain, which is large, would be responsible for termination of employment? And they say, well, this would be HR operations. And this is a subfield that deals with the entire life cycle of an employee. And we were like, okay, cool, got this. And can you move us forward to one of these people? And so we then understood better who's responsible within that field, got in touch with them and did 10 interviews with them and said, look, you do HR operations. Do you struggle with this kind of question? And if so, what's your problem? And they would tell us, yeah, it's like, it really takes time, between 3 and 10 hours per case. It's like a lot of work. And sometimes I feel uncomfortable with whether what we do right now is legally compliant. And I don't always want to escalate that to a lawyer externally, because it's really expensive. And so that's the way you very, very in a classic manner, you just reach out, you do interviews, you try to understand it. And at the end of the day, you ask them, would that be something you would be willing to help us to develop and perhaps eventually use? And so nowadays we work with Allianz Insurance. We work with one of the leading German and European manufacturers of logistic solutions, I can say. And we usually don't, with the companies, put the name so far up front for the plain reason that what we do is a lot about confidentiality. And so you wouldn't also find logos on our website who the companies are that actually use this service. Yeah.
I can understand that. That makes it more difficult for you to find others, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Difficult and really, really attractive, because you notice it's a really unsexy field.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about it, especially even within the startup field. Like, you would know that the scale-ups who raised a Series A in 2021 by now probably struggle unless they really do well with the headcount, and they would probably reduce the headcount in the coming months. Still, nobody wants to talk about that because it's really, really unsexy. Yet at the same time, that means it is a field that is usually untapped, because most people would hesitate to go into it. And what we realized, that's one of the things, classic first-time founder, not mistake, but late realization, I would say, is you have to distinguish between classic, what Sequoia Capital would call a hair and fire problem, something where you need a solution right now, and hard fact problems. Problems where people are like, it is what it is. It's nothing we can change.
Yeah.
This is just the facts. That's the way they are. It's plain and simple. And we realized that we are the second phase, where it's so unsexy and a field that nobody wants to talk about, because legal disputes, and that's something we've noticed and learned the hard way, are really intimate.
Yeah.
And so people don't want to talk about it. Usually that's something we're trying to change, don't want to really leave that to somebody externally. Yet at the same time, that means that without us freaky, like, small team, nobody so far went into that space. Nobody had the idea to do online dispute resolution in Germany as a neutral provider who helps both sides find a settlement, which means that we operate without many direct competitors, numerous indirect competitors, but nobody with the same idea looking towards the market, which means if we succeed and we just continue to survive long enough to show people that this is actually something viable, and it creates a huge defensibility, because it is really, really hard in a hard fact problem scenario to build a two-sided marketplace that eventually succeeds. And so when we do that, that by default will give us a high leverage but it is really painful for the first coming years. That's just the truth.
Educating customers is something that's really hard. That's something I hear from a lot of startups that do something new, just the way you're doing it. Yeah, but you have another level on top with it being very uncomfortable, very intimate.
And we didn't know that. Partially because we are lawyers and we thought having disputes is what is our bread and butter business, is our everyday job. But we had to learn over the time that people feel very different about it. And that sometimes escalates in our direction as well, that people are really frustrated and say, why do you reach out to me? I don't want to use that. Fair enough. But also in the opposite direction, that people, I had a case 2 weeks ago we successfully solved. That was in tenancy law. The person moved out already in September 2022. Got in touch with the local tenancy association in 2023 in May. And up to January this year, they were unable, with lawyers involved, to settle a case with the landlord. And we were able to settle the case within 3 weeks. And so you have both of that. And on one hand side, people who say, look, this is absolutely stupid. I don't want to participate in that. You have that. You have to live with that because it's unsexy, it's emotional, it's intimate. Yet at the same time, you have really high degrees of joy when you are capable of relieving somebody of that problem within weeks. To him, he was really fascinated. On the phone, he said to me, look, I told this my brother, I told this to my parents, I told this to my friends. I don't know how on earth you did that, but I'm deeply impressed. And so that's what I'm trying to say. Yes. On the scale of emotions, you only trigger the
extremes. Yeah. But you can work with the extremes. I think it's hard, but it's doable actually.
You have to go through a lot.
I imagine. Yeah. So let's talk about extremes.
Yes.
The positive one first. You were heading for publishing or making your platform available. So was the journey like, hey, you developed something AI-based solution for this really specific problem? Tell us about a bit of a peek. What was great about the whole development, because it's something you can really be proud of. The first MVP, but it's basically an MVP. The first MVP that's available. It makes something for people who are available, and you can be proud of it. But you get feedback to improve it, which is great. But you always know it's going to be bad. So like you need to improve. It's never like, wow, everything's amazing. How was that in your situation or in your startup development?
So to jump back to the chronicles, perhaps, in March 23, we decided to go full in and decided to work full time on it. We then, in like half a year roughly, must have been September, October, raised the first pre-seed round. And in March 24, so about a year later, we launched the platform. So what you would probably call an MVP version that is fully viable and can be used, but is still really basic, minimal viability.
Yeah.
And you would really see between especially January 24 and March 24 that we would work all weekends through to make it happen, because we had this date in mind, the 18th of March. That was when we said, this is where we want to do this. And we built everything up to that point. We hired new people for the beginning of the year to support us for the last stretch of building this out. We, for weeks, in fact, 1 or 2 months before that, reached out to journalists, prepared with partners, posts that they could do on LinkedIn surrounding that day, before and after. So we planned everything out that this must happen on this day. And everybody was really excited and we really worked hard on it. And it worked in the sense that we went live on that day. But it also didn't work at all because for the next 2 or 3 months, not a single real case would come. And so you would sit there deeply frustrated. And we've been told by some of our angel investors, they're like, Tim, nobody's going to come on the 18th of March. Let's just fucking face it. Yeah. Nobody knows you. Take it easy. But as you are first-time founders, you don't really know that. You're like, no, it's just, this must work. It will work. But they have no idea. This is so amazing. You're so deeply, so it's like deeply delusional to some degree to what you're doing that you are incapable of seeing the sad reality that is, you are a bunch of crazy folks who want to change something that has been this way for not just 5 or 10 years, but at least the last 50, if not longer. And so nothing happened. And there's this platform. You're really proud of it. It works flawlessly. more or less flawlessly. Obviously, there's always something you want to do on it, but it works. It does what it should do, but nobody comes. And that was harsh. That was like, you really picked this up, this is amazing, and then you just fall down.
Yeah.
And then slowly but steadily, first cases would come in. And then slowly but steadily, the first time the opposing side would participate. So it would not just be the one that files the case with us, but the other party saying, this is smart, I want to participate in that. And then sometime later, you would see, okay, the first time both of them find a common ground. We actually generate a successful contract that settles the dispute. And within a few days, that person gets the money paid out that is, according to the contract, what the landlord in that case should pay to the rentee. And so that was the part where you really fell deep, and then slowly but steadily. And that's something, and that's when we come to the second part of the question, how do you build with that? How can you use that feedback? This is where you only can start. And that's a classic chicken and egg problem, because without first cases, you are unable to really develop the platform. And with the specific thing that we do, legal disputes, is also not that you can just run out on the street and say to people, look, I have this company that it does X, Y, Z. Is that something you want? People would look at me and think that I would be crazy. So it's also not something that is publicly accessible, or something that people would, to somebody they don't know, in confidence talk about right away. And at the same time, without first validation and first confidence, and let's say first reviews on Trustpilot, etc., nobody would at the same time sign up for it. So you have a classic problem where you don't really know, how can I get out of that? But when you do, you really have to squeeze everything out of the few people that are willing to use your product. So when people sign up for it, we call them up. We say to them, look, there's a case filed against you. We are a neutral settlement body. I'm not in the interest arguing of the opposing side, neither do I argue in your interest. What we try to do is find a solution for this legal dispute. And so that's the first step, where we can learn a lot, where people would say, yeah, but I don't understand how it works. Okay, then we have to better explain on the platform how it does.
Yeah.
Or people would ask me, but how does your contract look like eventually? I don't want to buy something I can't really see. And so we had to then share the contract I had and make it accessible within the platform. So we would do a preview. And when a case is done, both in the great cases when it works, where people are really happy with me, as in the cases where cases didn't work out, we again call both sides. And we ask them, look, what do you think about it? Where can we improve? What worked out well? Did you have questions? Any bad feelings along the process? And we would really try to get everything out of these people. We'd actually do these interviews with two of us all the time, because sometimes you have interpretation issues, whereas one would understand it the one way, one would understand the other, and then we can talk about it. It's not just one person listening to it. But then you can make teeny tiny steps forward, which especially, again, in what we do, a hard fact problem in a field that is highly intimate to people is nothing that happens overnight. But to have the capacity to stay motivated every morning to wake up, knowing that you're probably going to get kicked in the nuts twice before lunch, is something that is really hard.
Two questions we got of that.
Go ahead.
First one, how did you deal with getting kicked twice?
I'm very literal, as you can tell by the way I speak.
How did you manage to actually, work with this months of no feedback? What did you actually do or not do? Because I imagine okay, no one is coming that. Let's change something. Let's work on it or something like that.
Yeah.
How did you approach that?
Thanks for joining us for the first part of this episode. We hope you enjoyed the discussion so far. If you're ready to keep the conversation going, part 2 is already available right here in the playlist. We appreciate you listening, and we can't wait to have you back for the rest of the story.